Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're focusing on a skill that's easy to overlook, but absolutely essential. We're going to look at listening in Chapter 7. In this session, we will explore why everyday conversations matter, the role of self-disclosure, different types of listening, and how it can improve the way we respond when others speak. Now, most of us think about how we talk, our tone, our eye contact, our delivery, but how often do you stop and ask yourself, how well do I listen? In fact, research from Wright State University shows that the average person listens to only about 25% efficiency. 25! So that means we have some work we need to do. So let's start with the first part of listening, and that would be conversations. The word conversation actually comes from Latin, meaning con, and versare, which I'll probably say wrong, it means turn. Basically, it's exactly as it sounds. It's a back and forth joint activity where two or more people exchange, not just information, but also feelings, ideas, thoughts, even perspectives. Conversations are one of the most common forms of relationships, but they don't happen automatically. They are an art we have to learn. So why do conversations matter? Think about your daily life. Think about today when you woke up. When is the first time you talked with someone? Conversations help meet a lot of needs. This goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, and it looks at our physical needs, being close to someone. It helps that social need of being able to talk with other people to get that identity of yourself, and even practical needs. Just, having some help with something, being able to talk. Sometimes we talk for control, sometimes for relaxation. Sometimes for affection, to show someone we care, and sometimes just for fun. But when those conversations go wrong, it often comes down to poor listening. Now, there are many different ways of not listening. You probably aren't too surprised, but these are a list of a few from our textbook. There are 6 different ways you could actively fall into a pitfall of not listening. The first one is pseudo-listening. That is pretending to listen. Maybe you're doing it right now. You're trying to focus. Or if you have someone talk to you and you've heard this conversation before, you pretend to listen, you kind of do the nod, but you're not fully listening to what they're saying. I've been known to do the same. I'm not saying we're all perfect. We can all struggle with this. Or maybe you're with someone who monopolizes the conversation. They think more about themselves instead of listening to who's talking. That means they're waiting for that perfect moment to just throw in their story. They didn't even hear a thing you said. They didn't really respond. Another one would be selective listening. This happens a lot in a college classroom, is you focus on only particular parts of the communication. You listen for the trigger words, like this will be on your midterm. Or if you're talking with a friend, you're selectively listening for different parts, like, oh, I could share my part here. It's part of the human process of wanting to share our own information. The fourth one here is defensive listening. Maybe you have someone who seems like they're kind of angry, so you're being defensive. You're listening for a way to kind of interact back and be like, well, don't forget about this. So it's perceiving a personal attack, criticism. It's a way of being able to respond to what you're hearing. Another one here is ambushing, listening carefully for the purpose of attacking that speaker. So maybe you're looking for a way like, oh, you forgot this, yes. And the last one is literal listening, listening only for content and basically ignoring the relationship of meanings. Maybe you hear someone like, oh, I'm fine, and you hear the words, but you're not getting the emotional aspect out of it, if that makes sense. All right, with listening, there are types of conversations that we use. Directionality, basically, there's either a one-way or a two-way conversation. Not all conversations are equal. Some are one-way, where the speaker dominates, while the listener only gives nods or maybe minimal feedback. Others are two-way, with both engaged and responding, and the tone matters also. Cooperative conversations, they build that communication. And then competitive conversations are more concerned with their point of view than others. So basically here, there's different ways you can look at something, like one-way conversations. Maybe someone's having a bad day, so they monopolize the conversation, and you give them nods. Two ways where it's active, you both get parts of the conversation you're helping. So you're cooperative, and it all kind of intertwines together. I really recommend looking at our textbook. They have some good visuals to really help you break down directionality and tone and purpose. But hopefully that helps you see there's different ways you can have a conversation. Now here's a key distinction. Hearing is not listening. There's actually 6 different steps to fully listen to something. Hearing is simply detecting sound. It is the perception of vibrations in your ear. You may hear yourself have someone say your name over and over. Maybe you physically hear it, but you're not fully listening, if that makes sense. Listening is when you physically hear, that's the first step, and then you interpret the sound. You start to understand the significance of it, which leads us to something I call it the hear-your model of listening, which you could pronounce it however you want. Everyone says it differently, but the first stage is to physically hear something, and you're hearing that message. This all happens very quickly, like in a second or two. You hear something, you start to understand and comprehend the message. And you're starting to get like, oh, this is in my language. These are words I know. You start to remember part of this, like, oh, you're starting to connect with these words, which then leads you to interpret the words and getting like the influence of going on, maybe if they're emotional or if they're not, and you're evaluating that whole message. That way you know, are you going to fully respond to something? Are you going to have a story to comprehend? Is this something you want to fully listen to, or are you going to kind of pseudo-listen and only pretend? So basically this happens within a second, very quickly when communicating with someone. All right, there are 4 listening styles here. The first one is people-oriented listeners. These are different terms you could use when you are working on the essay. Is people-oriented listeners focus on the sender more than the message. So they're looking at someone's body language. Is someone's, arms crossed? Do they seem sad? Another one would be the action-oriented listeners. You're more focused on what the source wants. Like maybe you see someone sad and they just want to be heard at this moment. They don't actually want help solving the situation. So action-oriented. Another one is content-oriented listeners. You're focused on the message in a systematic way. Basically, you're digging into the details. You're looking for details and evidence, and you're kind of searching around like, ooh, what's the secret message I'm not getting? Some are very good at this. And the last one here is time-oriented listeners. They are listeners that just want it quick and concise. They're like, okay, give it to me quick. This would be if I'm about to go lecture in a class and someone comes to my office. We're like, hey, I'm time-oriented. I got 1 minute. Give it to me quick. And so that's something you could do as well. But honestly, most of us are a mix of these. We're not always just one. It kind of varies. But which one would you say describes you the best? All right, some other ones here, types of listening that you might use. There's other ones from our book, and we'll go pretty quickly, but would be discriminative listening. You're listening for things you're paying attention to, like, oh, you said this, and you're waiting for those trigger words. Another one would be comprehensive, something maybe you're doing now. You're trying to understand and remember what I'm saying. You're trying to figure out, well, which parts are going to be on the midterm or my quiz or for a paper or essay. And honestly, a lot of it will be asking like, are you a good listener? And using some type of terminology we're covering here. Therapeutic is just being a sounding board for someone. Kind of, like we talked about, it's being that one-sided conversation where you're letting them monopolize. You would have critical listening, which is analyzing, questioning the message. You're really digging in deep. And then appreciative listening, that would be like if you're listening to the new Taylor Swift album. Yes, I went there. That would be appreciative, but maybe it's not your style. But you basically shift between these depending on the situation. Now, the best part here is how should you respond? Now, there's a few here. I think there are 7. Is silent listening. That would be sometimes saying nothing is more powerful than saying anything. There would be questioning, asking sincere questions, trying to clarify and encourage the person to share more. Like, and how does that make you feel? Paraphrasing, this is if someone is really having a conflictive moment, if they are yelling like, well, this isn't working, if you work in an environment like that and someone's upset, paraphrasing things back to them will actually help that conflict situation. Later on, we'll learn about conflict resolution. I think that's chapter 9, and basically paraphrasing is very helpful with listening. Emphasizing putting yourself in someone else's shoes and be like, wow, that would make me feel terrible. Supporting, showing encouragement, like, hey, I'm sorry you're going through that. I'm here. Analyzing and offering your own interpretation. Like if someone's having a bad day, like, oh, that person really didn't mean that. And you help them analyze the situation. And then lastly would be evaluating and advising. So you're evaluating with your own types and then advising what you think would be best. Now, the most important part here of the chapter that I really want you to focus on is something called self-disclosure. Now, self-disclosure is the act of verbally and non-verbally revealing information about yourself. Now, if you were to go around and do those fun icebreakers and they say, tell me about yourself, what are the things we typically do? We share things like, oh, I have a pet. I love this color. This is my favorite food. We reveal those safe topics, which is something, the third one here is social penetration theory. It's basically like an onion. Is that on the outer side, you're getting to know someone. We give the safe topics. We give that orientation until we get deeper. Our relationship with someone gets a little bit deeper to the middle. And that gives us to, social penetration to where we're able to get to know someone as time moves on. We've moved from the safe topics to like, well, what do you think about this? And you're like, phew, glad we relate there. But basically, self-disclosure here is revealing information about yourself to someone else. And social penetration is that you figure out the safe topics and you allow yourself to become more dependent on someone. But then what happens when you share something and like something wild happens, like, well, I don't like that. That would be the expectancy violation theory. Basically, what happens when they violate the norm? If you're going in a circle saying things that you love and they start sharing things that they hate, and it kind of violates what you all decided, this is what we're going to do today. What happens? It basically makes it negative and people won't listen to you, is basically the idea here. And this is where I got Shrek. If you've ever seen the movie, think about the onions, and that will help you think of social penetration. And then lastly here, finally, let's not forget that listening is shaped by our perception. We don't just take in words, we filter them based on our expectations, our emotions, our past experiences, even our cultural background. That's why perception checking and clarifying that what we think we heard before is such a powerful tool. So to wrap this up, listening is not a passive activity, it's active. It's intentional and central to meaningful communication. It involves avoiding bad habits like pseudo-listening. It involves choosing the right listening style. It involves practicing your skills like paraphrasing, maybe emphasizing with someone, and balancing listening with the appropriate self-disclosure. Now, for your upcoming reflection, think about a real-life situation where listening, or lack thereof, made a difference. Could you be applying these concepts to the change? Would it have changed how it came out? Well, thank you for joining me today. And remember, better listening doesn't just make you a better communicator. It makes you a better friend, a partner, and leader. Have a wonderful day.